There are 200 warships in your system. You have 7. What do you do? Ambassador Yara Osei already knew the answer. She had known it for 6 years. The galaxy had never been fair. Stars burned and died without asking permission. Worlds rose from dust and vanished back into it. Civilizations came and went in the same quiet rhythm. Some grew strong enough to leave their skies, most did not. And among those that reached the wider galaxy, one rule slowly revealed itself without ever being written down, voted on, or declared official. Strength decided everything. Not strength in the loud sense, speeches and banners and pride. Those things were common and often meaningless. The strength that mattered was quieter. It was the ability to defend what was yours when someone stronger came to take it. Every species that survived long enough eventually learned this lesson. Some built enormous fleets and displayed them openly. Others formed alliances, weaving complicated webs of mutual defense. A few relied on distance, hiding in remote systems where no one powerful had reason to look. But every strategy came down to the same truth. If someone believed you were weak, sooner or later they would test that belief. When that moment came, there were only 2 possible outcomes. You proved them wrong, or you disappeared. For nearly 4 centuries, the closest thing the known galaxy had to order was an organization called the Galactic Concord. It was not a government. No single species ruled it. No fleet enforced its laws. Instead, it functioned as a balance of influence between 47 civilizations that had all reached the stars and decided, somewhat reluctantly, that cooperation was occasionally more profitable than war. The Concord had not been created out of idealism. It had been created out of exhaustion. Before it existed, dozens of young interstellar civilizations had discovered one another almost simultaneously and reacted in the most predictable way possible. They fought. Trade routes became battlegrounds. Entire civilizations disappeared within decades of first contact. Every species believed its own survival depended on becoming stronger than everyone else as quickly as possible. For a time, that assumption seemed correct. Then the wars began to overlap. Even the winners realized the cost was becoming unsustainable. Systems that might have been prosperous trade partners were reduced to debris fields. Infrastructure that had taken centuries to build vanished in a few hours of bombardment. The galaxy was learning a lesson humanity had taken thousands of years to understand on a much smaller scale. Total war was inefficient. So the strongest surviving civilizations met to negotiate something new. They created the Concord, not to forbid war, which would have been unrealistic, but to make open conquest far more difficult. Borders were recorded. Trade corridors were declared neutral zones. Disputes could be brought before a council rather than settled with fleets. It was not a perfect system, but it was better than the alternative. The Concord met on a massive neutral station called Arth Prime, floating in empty space between 3 distant star systems, far from any single civilization's territory. Its central chamber, the Hall of Deliberation, was an amphitheater carved from polished alloy and crystal, enormous enough to hold delegations from every member civilization. The seating arrangement reflected the only thing that mattered inside the Concord: power. The oldest and most powerful civilizations sat close to the center. Newer members sat farther away. And on the very outer ring, where the distance to the speaking floor was so great that the delegates below looked like small figures on a distant stage, sat the newest additions to the galactic community. One of those seats belonged to Earth. Humanity had been part of the Concord for only 6 years. 6 years was barely enough time for the rest of the galaxy to form a serious opinion. It was long enough, however, for them to reach a simple conclusion. Earth was interesting. Earth was ambitious. But Earth was not important. Its fleet was small. Its territory was a single star system. Its representatives listened more than they spoke. Most of the galaxy believed humanity would spend the next century quietly learning the rules of interstellar politics. Very few believed humans would ever rewrite them. Ambassador Yara Osei had sat in that outer ring seat for 3 of those 6 years. She was a tall woman, gray-haired and unhurried in the way of someone who had made peace with patience long ago. 30 years of diplomatic service across 4 continents had given her a particular kind of stillness, the ability to sit in a room where she was being underestimated and not let anyone see that she knew it. She noticed the small things. The way certain inner ring delegates would glance toward the outer ring when Earth's name appeared in a motion, not with hostility, but with the mild disinterest of someone looking at furniture. The way her communication requests to senior delegations were answered slowly, if at all. The way a Torvani trade representative had once spoken directly past her to her aide, as though Yara herself were simply not worth addressing. She noted all of it, said nothing, and waited. Her aide, Tomas Ibarra, had joined the diplomatic corps only 3 years earlier. He was intelligent and quick with political signals, genuinely talented, but his face still showed things that Yara had long since learned to hide. One morning, after a session in which a senior key delegate had spoken over Yara during a trade discussion as if she hadn't raised her hand at all, Tomas had leaned close as they left the hall. "Doesn't that bother you?" he asked quietly. Yara glanced at him. "Of course," she said. "Then why?" "Because the moment they stop underestimating us," she said, "is the moment our advantage disappears." Tomas had not understood that yet. He would. In the eastern reaches of known space, the Vorath Dominion had built an empire the old-fashioned way. They had taken it. The Vorath were a species that most diplomats described in careful language. Words like direct, decisive, and pragmatic appeared frequently in official reports. In private conversations, the descriptions were less polite. Expansionist, predatory, unapologetic. They stood on 2 powerful legs, wide-shouldered and forward-leaning, their skin covered in thick scaled plates that shifted in color with age, deep green in youth, fading to iron gray over the decades. Their eyes were large and widely spaced, capable of seeing across multiple light spectrums. But the most distinctive feature of the Vorath was not their appearance. It was their philosophy. They viewed the galaxy in simple terms. Territory belonged to those who could hold it. Resources belonged to those who could defend them. Civilizations that lacked the strength to protect themselves inevitably became part of someone else's domain. 2 centuries earlier, their expansion had begun with what they called a security campaign. Neighboring civilizations had been offered a straightforward choice: accept Vorath protection and become part of the Dominion, or refuse. The first 2 species had refused. Their worlds now existed primarily in historical archives. After that, negotiations with the Vorath tended to conclude much more quickly. The Dominion now spanned 11 star systems across a broad section of the eastern galaxy. Most had not originally belonged to the Vorath. Several smaller civilizations had accepted integration rather than risk extinction. Others had become economic dependencies, trading autonomy for security under the Vorath military umbrella. No one doubted the Dominion's willingness to use force, and very few doubted its ability to win. At the center of that military power stood High Marshal Katara. He had commanded fleets for nearly 5 decades. His scales darkened to deep iron gray, and the bony ridge above his eyes thickened with age. He had earned his position through a long career of decisive victories. 2 entire star systems had fallen under Dominion control during campaigns he personally directed. One through open battle, one through the simple mathematics of overwhelming force, where the defending government had concluded that resistance would only produce unnecessary casualties. Among the Vorath, that second outcome was considered excellent leadership. Katara was not reckless. He preferred battles that were already decided before the first shot. His approach was always the same: study the opponent, identify their weaknesses, arrive with enough force that victory becomes mathematics rather than uncertainty, then act quickly. When intelligence reports about the Sol system began appearing in his briefings, Katara reviewed them with professional interest. Earth's economy was growing rapidly: industrial manufacturing, energy production, trade. Human vessels had begun appearing along several major routes. Their technology development was progressing faster than expected for a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 years earlier. But militarily, the situation looked very different. Multiple reconnaissance scans confirmed the same conclusion: 1 orbital defense platform above Earth, 7 patrol frigates, no visible heavy fleet, no long-range weapons arrays, no deep space fortifications. Then Katara looked at Earth's location on the galactic map, and the opportunity clarified itself completely. The 3 most valuable trade corridors in the eastern sector of the galaxy intersected at a single location: the Sol system. Ships moving between the KE corridor, the Drev Passage, and the Outer Reach route passed within a few light-years of humanity's home star. Control of that intersection meant influence over a significant portion of interstellar commerce, the kind of leverage that reshaped regional politics for generations. The Sol system was economically extraordinary, strategically irreplaceable, and defended by 7 ships. Katara studied the reports once more. He had spent 50 years learning to recognize a gift when the galaxy offered one. This was a gift. Even better, there was a legal pathway. The Concord Charter contained a rarely used provision called Article 12. It allowed member civilizations to request a review of another member's defensive capability if that system was considered critical to galactic trade stability. If a world could not demonstrate adequate self-defense, the Concord could reclassify it as a non-militarized dependency, placed, in theory, under the protection of a stronger member species. In practice, such worlds became client states. Katara instructed his ambassador, a disciplined diplomat named Drex New York, to file a formal Article 12 review request. The plan was clean. First, raise the issue before the Concord. Present the defense skin data. Frame the discussion as concern for trade security. Then offer Vorith protection. If the humans accepted, the Dominion would gain control of the Sol trade intersection without firing a shot. And if they refused, Katara had 200 warships available for deployment. Either outcome was acceptable. Drex New York understood his instructions perfectly. This was not a diplomatic negotiation. It was the opening move of a conquest. And if everything went according to plan, the rest of the galaxy would watch it happen while calling it procedure. Meanwhile, for months before Drex New York filed his Article 12 motion, the shipyards of the Vorith Dominion had already begun quietly assembling the fleet. Katara preferred to have the mathematics arranged before the argument began. By the time the legal motion reached the Concord floor, 200 warships were already fueled, crewed, and waiting for the order to move. The Hall of Deliberation was unusually quiet that morning. Most sessions of the Concord assembly unfolded with the slow rhythm of routine diplomacy, trade proposals, border adjustments, technical negotiations. The work was important but rarely dramatic. On this particular day, a request had appeared on the schedule that drew far more attention than usual. A formal motion under Article 12. Requests of that kind were rare. No species liked the implication that their defenses might be considered inadequate. But the motion had been filed properly, and procedure required that it be heard. When the time came, the Vorith ambassador walked to the central floor. Drex New York moved with the slow, deliberate posture of his species. His scales were polished dark beneath the overhead lights, the black and gold formal markings of the Dominion arranged precisely along his collar. He paused at the podium for a moment, scanning the surrounding tiers. 47 civilizations watched him. He activated the display panels. A three-dimensional map of the Eastern Trade Sector appeared above the podium, lines of light representing commercial routes stretching between distant stars. 3 of those lines intersected at a single point, the Sol system. Drex New York spoke in the calm, measured tone of someone presenting technical information rather than political pressure. He explained that the Dominion had recently completed a routine survey of trade corridors in the Eastern Sector. During that survey, his vessels had gathered updated sensor data on systems near key commercial routes. The display shifted. A second projection appeared, an analysis of Earth's known defensive capabilities. 1 orbital defense platform above Earth. 7 patrol-class frigates. No confirmed deep space defense networks. No heavy warships. No long-range deterrent systems. The readout rotated slowly in the air. The Sol system, Drex New York explained, sat at the intersection of 3 trade networks responsible for transporting rare elements, advanced manufacturing components, and energy materials across large portions of the Concord. If instability occurred in such a location, the consequences could ripple across multiple sectors of the galactic economy. Under Article 12, the Concord was obligated to review whether a system occupying such a critical position possessed sufficient defensive capacity. He paused. Given the evidence, the Dominion believed Earth's current defenses might be insufficient. However, and here his tone shifted towards something that might, in a certain light, resemble generosity. The Vorith Dominion wished to approach this matter constructively. As a senior Concord member with extensive deep space patrol capability, The Dominion was prepared to offer its assistance. Specifically, the Vorith would be willing to assume protective oversight of the Sol system. Their fleets would ensure the safety of the trade routes. Earth would remain under the Concord's broader diplomatic framework. He stepped back from the podium. The word control was never spoken, but everyone in the chamber understood what had just been said. From the inner rings of the chamber, a few delegates exchanged quiet glances. Some were neutral, some looked thoughtful. One senior KE representative, the same one who had spoken past Yara in the trade discussion 3 months earlier, looked almost amused, in the way of someone watching a predictable but competently executed play. It was a very clean maneuver. Legal, procedural, backed by data that appeared difficult to dispute. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, from the outer ring, a chair moved quietly. Ambassador Yara Ose stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not request the floor with any particular urgency. She simply rose, and the chamber gradually turned its attention toward the provisional ring, toward the small delegation from the single-system civilization most of them had not considered seriously in 6 years. When Yara spoke, her voice was calm. Earth appreciated the Dominion's concern for the security of interstellar trade. Her government would review the proposal carefully. According to Concord procedure, Earth was entitled to 30 days before issuing a formal response. She inclined her head slightly toward Drex, New York. Then she returned to her seat. No anger, no alarm, no attempt to challenge the data. Just a brief acknowledgement, a procedural note, and a small, respectful nod. The KE delegate's expression of mild amusement didn't change. The session moved on. In the private corridors of Arth Prime, conversations began almost immediately. Everyone understood what had just happened. The Vorith had made their move, and if Earth refused the offer, the next step would not be another diplomatic motion. When Yara returned to the suite assigned to Earth's delegation, she walked at the same steady pace she always used in the public corridors. Tomas was not managing to do the same. By the time the door closed behind them, the question had already reached his face. He held it together for exactly 3 seconds. Was that? Were you expecting that? Yara placed her data pad on the table and sat down. Yes. He blinked. You expected the Dominion to invoke Article 12. Not the exact timing, she said. But the attempt was inevitable. We've been sitting on the most valuable trade intersection in the eastern sector for 6 years. The only question was who would move first. Tomas was quiet for a moment. They think we're defenseless. Yara looked at him steadily. They think what we've allowed them to think. She held his gaze just long enough for that to land. Then she leaned back in her chair. Send a message to Earth. Priority encrypted, full compression. Address it to the Secretary General and the Joint Chiefs simultaneously. Tomas opened his tablet. What should it say? She considered for a moment. 4 words. He waited. They've made their move. The message reached Earth 38 minutes later. It arrived in Geneva, where the headquarters of the United Earth government overlooked the dark waters of Lake Geneva beneath an early morning sky. The Secretary General read it first. The second recipient read it seconds afterward, in a quieter office in the Joint Strategic Command building where Admiral Eric Vance had been awake for several hours already. Vance read the 4 words once. Then he reached for a different device, one not connected to any public communications network, with no external transmitter and no automatic logging system. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. Observation protocol, Vance said. Then he ended the call. He sat for a moment, looking through the window at the lights of the city below. After 37 years of preparation, the waiting phase was finally over. 3,000 meters beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, in one of the deepest and least explored places on Earth, a facility known officially as the Bastion Shipyards received the same signal 2 minutes later. Commander Dara Voss watched the activation message appear on the central display as her transport submersible descended toward the complex. Outside the reinforced viewport, darkness pressed against the glass in every direction. Then the lights of the shipyards appeared below. Even after 6 years of commanding the facility, the sight still impressed her. The Bastion complex stretched across the seafloor like a submerged city, massive dry dock structures anchored directly into the oceanic crust, connected by long corridors of reinforced alloy and pressure-sealed transit tubes. Construction had begun 37 years earlier. Thousands of workers had participated across different sections, each team assigned to projects that appeared isolated from one another. Most believed they were contributing to deep-sea research installations, experimental energy platforms, classified industrial work. Only a few hundred people on Earth had ever seen the complete design. The truth was much larger. Bastion was not a research station. It was a warship factory, and it had already produced 11 capital-class vessels. When Voss stepped into the command level of the complex, activity was already accelerating. Technicians moved quickly between control stations. Power systems that had been running at minimal standby levels began ramping up. On the main display, a sequence of status updates appeared in rapid succession. Crew recall protocols initiated. Deep system assets responding. Asteroid network waking. Voss studied the readouts. Status of the belt contingent? She asked. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Ren Park, checked his tablet. Activation confirmed, he said. All 14 ships responding. He paused. They've been asleep for a long time. They were built for this, Voss said. They'll be fine. She said it matter-of-factly, but she felt the weight of the moment. 6 years of commanding this facility. 6 years of drill cycles and maintenance checks and systems reviews for ships that were never allowed to move. 6 years of explaining to new crew members why they were maintaining weapons no one was supposed to know about. Now the mathematics were finally going to be tested. 52 million kilometers away, deep within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, 14 objects slowly came to life. For years they had appeared indistinguishable from the countless rocks drifting through that region of space. Their hulls were coated with composite materials designed to mimic the thermal signatures of natural asteroids. Passive sensor systems had been active throughout, quietly monitoring traffic while the ships themselves remained dormant. Now their reactors began to wake. Dim light crept through corridors that had been dark for months. Environmental systems restarted. Gravity generators hummed softly as they returned to operational status. Petty Officer Lena Cho was the first crew member to reach her station aboard the UEF Indomitable. She had been in standby rotation for 4 months. For months of maintenance shifts and low-gravity drills inside a ship that wasn't allowed to turn on its own lights above 5%. She settled into her post at the Point Defense Coordination Board and began running her startup checklist. Around her, the Dreadnought came alive. The first time she had boarded the Indomitable, 2 years earlier, she had stood in the main corridor for a full minute just trying to understand the scale of the thing. The ship was nearly 4 kilometers long from bow to stern. Its armored hull was layered with materials designed specifically to absorb or deflect high-energy impacts, the result of decades of engineering refinement. Human engineers had spent those decades asking one simple question. If you wanted to build the most survivable warship possible, what would it look like? The Indomitable was one answer. Its mass drivers could accelerate dense tungsten cylinders to a significant fraction of the speed of light. The crew had a saying about those weapons. By the time you see the round coming, the ship it was aimed at no longer exists. Its missile banks could launch hundreds of independent warheads simultaneously, each one guided by its own targeting intelligence. Its point defense network, thousands of micro-turrets coordinated by advanced AI targeting systems, could shred incoming fire faster than most civilization sensors could track. Cho ran her board through the startup sequence and watched the displays come green one by one. For months of waiting, she found she wasn't nervous. She was ready. Inside Fort Silence, the Lunar Command facility buried deep beneath the far side of the moon, Admiral Haruto Shin studied the tactical display filling the center of the command chamber. Fort Silence had been constructed 20 years earlier for one purpose: strategic coordination. From this facility, every sensor network in the solar system could be monitored simultaneously. Communication with Earth's hidden defense infrastructure flowed through encrypted channels that no external civilization had ever detected. Shin had been involved in designing that system. Before commanding the Belt Contingent, he had served as one of the architects of the Iron Doctrine, the strategic framework that had guided every major military decision Earth made for 37 years. The doctrine was simple: appear weaker than you are. Let potential enemies believe you are harmless. Encourage them to underestimate you. Then prepare quietly for the moment when they act on that assumption. The 7 frigates orbiting Earth were what the galaxy was meant to see. The 14 dreadnoughts hidden in the asteroid belt were something else entirely. For 37 years, The visible fleet had remained small and unconvincing. Defense spending appeared modest. Earth's economic and scientific priorities were the only ones that showed. Most of the galaxy believed humanity's attention was focused on growth and exploration. And for 37 years, beneath that carefully maintained appearance, the real work had continued. Shin watched the status lights on the display change from amber to green as each dreadnought completed its startup sequence. Indomitable, relentless, sovereignty, Titan's wrath, Vanguard, Resolute, 14 ships, all operational. Commander Voss appeared on the communication screen. All assets responding, she reported. Estimated enemy arrival. Approximately 70 hours, Voss said. If the Dominion launches immediately. They already have, Shin said. He had studied Katara's operational history carefully. The fleet had been assembling for months. The Article 12 motion had been filed after the fleet was already ready. Katara was not a man who filed a legal motion and waited to see if he needed the ships. He filed the motion and moved the ships simultaneously. Shin looked at the projection of the solar system rotating slowly above the command table. The asteroid belt had been mapped in extraordinary detail over decades. Thousands of firing angles and engagement zones had been calculated and recalculated. Defensive arrays had been embedded inside carefully selected asteroids. Everything had been designed with a single purpose: to turn the inner solar system into the most dangerous battlefield an invading fleet could possibly enter. The belt contingent reports full readiness, Park said from the shipyard control center. Voss glanced at the display showing the 14 reactor signatures scattered across the asteroid field. They've been waiting a long time, she said quietly. Shin heard it through the open channel. Yes, he said. Everyone has. In the heavily fortified war docks of the Vorith Dominion, the final preparations were already underway. The fleet assembled above the industrial world of Kethra filled the sky like a gathering storm. 200 warships, cruisers, destroyers, carrier vessels, heavy artillery platforms, floated in carefully organized formations while thousands of technicians completed the last fueling and calibration procedures. For the Vorith, this was not an unusual deployment. The Dominion maintained several fleets of similar size across its territory. Military readiness was a permanent condition. But even by Dominion standards, the mission was expected to be simple. High Marshal Katara stood on the command platform of his flagship, the warship Kethra, studying the tactical displays. The ship was nearly 800 meters long, heavily armored, and crewed by more than 1,000 officers and soldiers trained to execute fleet operations with the precision expected of the Dominion's elite. Around it, 200 warships waited. Katara reviewed the intelligence reports one final time. 1 orbital defense platform. 7 patrol frigates. No confirmed deep space fleet. No large-scale fortifications. The Dominion fleet outnumbered Earth's visible forces by a factor that made the concept of battle almost meaningless. 200 warships against 7 frigates. This was not a conflict. It was an announcement. He allowed himself one quiet thought before giving the order. The humans had been given a graceful option. Accept protection. Preserve their people, their culture, their economy. Become part of something larger under the Dominion's security umbrella. If they were wise, they would take it. If they refused, he turned to his fleet operations officer. Status. All vessels ready. High Marshal. Transmit departure authorization. The massive warships activated their faster-than-light drives. Space around them bent and shimmered as each vessel slipped into the corridors between stars. Within minutes, 200 ships vanished from the sky above Kethra. They were heading for Earth. Neither Katara nor any officer in the fleet looked back. There was no reason to. 3 days later, the Dominion fleet re-emerged at the outer edge of the Sol system. The transition from faster-than-light travel to normal space was silent, but the appearance of nearly 200 warships in a single region created a disturbance that every sensor array in the solar system detected simultaneously. The ships appeared in a wide crescent formation, automatically orienting toward the inner planets. The sun was a distant bright point in the darkness ahead. Katara ordered a system scan. Within seconds, the flagship's long-range detection systems mapped the region ahead. Planetary bodies appeared on the tactical display. The asteroid belt, the gas giants, the inner rocky planets. Then the military signatures. 7 ships, orbiting Earth. exactly where the reconnaissance reports had predicted. Orbital defense platform confirmed, the sensor chief reported. Armament profile consistent with previous scans. Katara studied the readings. Nothing had changed. No hidden fleets appeared in the outer system. No defensive formations waited among the asteroids. No large-scale weapons arrays powered up in response to the Dominion arrival. The Sol system was quiet. Completely, unremarkably quiet. Begin approach, Katara ordered. The fleet accelerated inward. The massive crescent formation moved slowly toward the sun, maintaining careful spacing to allow clear fields of fire. Standard invasion doctrine required caution during initial entry into a hostile system. But the Dominion commanders were not expecting real resistance. They ran active scans without bothering to conceal their presence. This was intimidation, a demonstration of overwhelming force. Across the fleet, Vorath captains observed the same tactical picture. 7 frigates. 1 aging defense platform. No meaningful fleet. A few officers privately wondered why the humans hadn't attempted to deploy reinforcements. Others concluded that Earth simply lacked the capacity to do so. One sensor officer spoke up from his station. There are minor thermal anomalies within the asteroid belt. Source? Katara asked. Uncertain. Possibly geological activity or natural radiation from mineral deposits. Katara considered the report briefly. Asteroids often produced unusual sensor signatures. Metal-rich formations could reflect energy readings in unpredictable ways. Log them for later analysis, he said. The fleet continued inward. Inside Fort Silence, Admiral Shun watched the cluster of red markers moving steadily toward the inner planets. 200 warships. Exactly as predicted. He checked the clock. The fleet would reach the designated engagement threshold in just under 8 hours. Behind the asteroid belt, 14 dormant dreadnoughts waited quietly among the rocks. Their reactors were warm. Their crews were ready. Their weapons had been aimed at these coordinates for decades. Shun turned to his communications officer. Open system broadcast. A signal burst outward from the network of transmitters buried throughout the solar system. Across the Dominion fleet, communication panels flickered. A video transmission appeared simultaneously on every Vorath command display. The image resolved into a plain scene. A human officer seated behind a simple desk. No dramatic backdrop. No ceremonial uniforms or symbols of power. Just a gray-haired man in a dark service jacket, a cup of coffee resting beside his hand on the desk. Admiral Haruto Shun looked directly into the camera. The fleet of the Vorath Dominion is now inside a designated human exclusion zone. Katara listened from the bridge of the Kethvara, his expression unchanged. Your ships have been detected running active targeting systems against assets within the Sol system. That action constitutes a hostile military posture. You are instructed to reverse course and withdraw from this system immediately. A brief pause. You have 1 hour. Failure to comply will result in the United Earth Fleet responding with appropriate and overwhelming force. The transmission ended. For several seconds, the bridge of the Kethvara was silent. Katara studied the tactical display. 7 frigates. 1 orbital platform. Nothing else. A faint, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. Open a return channel. Moments later, his image replaced Shun's across the fleet-wide transmission network. He leaned slightly forward. You have presented an ultimatum, he said calmly. Allow me to simplify the response. A pause. Long enough to let the translation systems carry the words clearly across every channel in the Concord network. Kneel. He held the camera for 1 more second. Or burn. The channel closed. Inside Fort Silence, Shun watched the transmission end. For a brief moment, he said nothing. Then he picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. He set the cup back on the desk. Then he looked toward his tactical officer. Bring them up. The asteroid belt had always looked chaotic from a distance. Billions of rocks, dust clouds, and fragments of metal drifting slowly between Mars and Jupiter. To most civilizations in the galaxy, such regions were little more than navigation hazards, places ships crossed carefully but rarely used for anything important. The Vorath Dominion had treated it the same way. That assumption lasted exactly 90 seconds after Shun gave the order. Across the belt, 14 enormous shapes emerged from the darkness. The asteroids that had appeared completely inert moments earlier suddenly flared with reactor light. Vast armored hulls shifted free of their rocky disguises as camouflage plates separated and drifted away. On every Vorith tactical display, new contacts appeared simultaneously. 14. Each one enormous. Each one radiating energy signatures far beyond anything the Dominion had ever encountered in a capital-class warship. The sensor chief on the bridge of the Kethphra stared at his readings. High Marshal, 14 contacts, capital scale. Katara stepped forward. How large? The officer hesitated. 3 to 5 kilometers, each. For the first time since entering the Sol system, the bridge of the flagship fell completely silent. Aboard the UEF Indomitable, Petty Officer Cho watched the tactical display transform as the dreadnoughts revealed themselves one after another. She felt the vibration change in the deck plating beneath her feet as the ship's reactors surged from warm standby to full combat power. The sound was different from anything she had experienced in drills, deeper, more purposeful, like something enormous waking up and meaning it. Her point defense board lit green across the full array. All systems nominal, she reported. Good, said the officer behind her. Keep them that way. 2 dreadnoughts had been positioned deeper inside the asteroid belt than the others. The UEF Sovereignty and the UEF Relentless. For hours they had remained completely silent inside narrow channels between clusters of massive asteroids. Their firing solutions had been calculated years earlier and adjusted continuously as orbital movements shifted the rocks around them. Now the Dominion fleet was sliding directly into that corridor. When the Sovereignty and the Relentless fired, the effect was immediate. Mass driver rounds launched from both ships simultaneously. Dense tungsten cylinders accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light. No explosive warhead was necessary. At that velocity, simple mass became a force more destructive than most energy weapons. The projectiles crossed the engagement distance in seconds. The first Vorith cruiser in the corridor vanished almost without drama. One moment it was there. The next it was a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated debris. The physics were so extreme that the ship had no time to register damage before it simply ceased to exist. 2 destroyers behind it suffered similar fates moments later. More rounds followed. The corridor between the 2 dreadnoughts became a narrow tunnel of destruction. Ships caught inside it had almost no time to react. Evasion at those speeds required precognition rather than piloting skill. 6 minutes after the first shot, 41 Dominion vessels had been destroyed. Others spun out of control, drives disabled and hulls shattered by secondary impacts. The Vorith formation collapsed into confusion. Katara reacted quickly. Break formation. Expand the crescent. The Dominion fleet began spreading outward, attempting to widen its firing arcs and prevent further ambushes from the belt. It was the correct tactical response. It was exactly what Shun had predicted. Behind the dreadnoughts, 18 smaller ships accelerated out of the asteroid field. Cruisers and heavy frigates, fast vessels designed for maneuver warfare. Their orders were simple. Be seen. Broadcast large electronic signatures. Move quickly toward the outer edge of the belt. The Dominion captains responded instinctively. Fast-moving contacts approaching from broken terrain triggered standard interception protocols. Several Vorith squadrons peeled away from the main formation to pursue the smaller ships. The crescent formation compressed toward its center. Exactly as intended. On the Indomitable's tactical display, Shun watched the Dominion fleet consolidate. They're taking the bait. Formation density increasing, his tactical officer confirmed. Prepare Phase 3. Buried inside 43 specific asteroids throughout the belt was a system no other civilization had ever attempted to build. The Hephaestus Array. Each of those asteroids contained a concealed mass driver carved deep into the rock. For years they had remained dormant, powered down and indistinguishable from natural formations. Now they woke. Across the belt, hidden weapons aligned themselves on a single set of coordinates. The compressed center of the Dominion fleet. Commander Daravas stood on the bridge of the Titan's Wrath, watching the enemy formation shift. Katara's ships were converging toward her position, massing their firepower against the dreadnought he believed to be the weakest link in the human formation. She opened a channel to Fort Silence. He's committing. Shin's voice came back steady. Hephaestus authorization confirmed. 43 asteroids fired at once. The mass driver rounds launched from dozens of different angles across the belt, converging on the same volume of space where the Dominion fleet had gathered. The barrage lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the interior of the formation became a storm. Ships disappeared under direct impacts. Others shattered as the shockwaves from nearby collisions tore through their hulls. Reactor explosions cascaded through warships that had gathered too closely together. When the barrage ended, 47 additional Dominion vessels had been destroyed. 11 more drifted powerless through space, their systems disabled beyond recovery. The Dominion fleet had lost nearly half its strength. Katara was not a coward. Even as the destruction unfolded around him, even as the mathematics of the engagement transformed from certainty into catastrophe, he continued issuing commands. "Concentrate fire," he ordered. "One target." The remaining warships aligned their weapons toward the Titan's wrath. Energy beams, missile swarms, kinetic weapons, all of it launched simultaneously from over 100 ships. The volume of fire was enormous. For a brief moment, it overwhelmed the Dreadnoughts' defensive network. 18 direct impacts struck the Titan's wrath within 3 seconds. Across the Dominion fleet, something flickered. Not hope exactly, but the instinct to keep fighting. Then the Dreadnought emerged from the explosion cloud. Scorched, damaged. One of its secondary weapon arrays had gone dark, but it was still accelerating forward, its main drives blazing, its remaining weapons fully operational. On the bridge of the Titan's wrath, Voss pulled herself back to her station. The impacts had thrown her hard against her console. A cut above her eyebrow was bleeding freely, and at least one rib felt wrong when she breathed. Warning displays covered half her screens. She silenced the ones that weren't critical, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and looked at the tactical readout. "Still here, Admiral," she said into the channel, her voice carefully level. "He's compressing his fleet again." Shin studied the display. The remaining Dominion ships were pulling closer together, concentrating their strength in a desperate last attempt. Directly into the final prepared position, he looked at his tactical officer. "Execute." The Dreadnought formation shifted. 14 massive ships moved through the asteroid field, surrounding the damaged and disorganized Dominion fleet from multiple directions. Mass drivers fired. Missiles filled the space between the formations. Point defense systems shredded incoming fire before it could reach its targets. The outcome became unavoidable. Katara understood. He had not entered a battle. He had walked his fleet into a battlefield designed specifically to destroy it. The trap had not been set when the Dreadnoughts appeared. It had been set 37 years ago, when the first asteroid was hollowed out and the first firing solution was calculated. Every movement his fleet had made since crossing the threshold had followed a script written before he was even aware this system existed. 140 Dominion ships had been lost. 62 remained. None of them could win this fight. He opened a fleet-wide channel. Full withdrawal. No attempt to disguise the order. No elaboration. The surviving Vorith ships turned away from the asteroid belt and accelerated toward open space. Behind them, the 14 Dreadnoughts of the United Earth Fleet remained motionless among the rocks. Watching, waiting, letting the remnants of an empire flee the trap that had taken 37 years to build. 3 weeks after the Battle of Seoul, the Galactic Concord convened the largest emergency session in its history. Arth Prime had hosted thousands of diplomatic meetings across 4 centuries, but never one quite like this. Every seat in the Hall of Deliberation was filled. Delegates who rarely attended floor sessions had traveled across dozens of light years to be present. Observation galleries normally reserved for analysts and historians were open to accommodate additional representatives from minor member worlds. Everyone in the galaxy wanted to see what happened next, because for the first time in generations, the balance of power inside the Concord had shifted overnight. The meeting began with the Vorith Dominion. High Marshal Katara did not appear in person. The Dominion sent a legal representative named Tafrail, a seasoned diplomat known for handling difficult negotiations. He stood at the podium with the composed posture of someone who understood that every eye in the chamber was watching him. The Dominion's official statement was delivered calmly. The incursion into the Sol system, he explained, had been conducted under the legal framework of Article 12. The Vorith fleet had intended to enforce protective oversight in order to secure vital trade routes. Unfortunately, the situation had escalated. The Dominion regretted the loss of life on both sides and was prepared to discuss a formal ceasefire arrangement along with reasonable compensation terms. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then a low wave of reaction spread through the hall. It was not quite laughter. It was not quite outrage. But it was unmistakably disbelief, the sound of several dozen civilizations simultaneously processing the same thought. The moderator called for order. Then she turned toward the outer ring. Ambassador Yara Osei of Earth has requested the floor. In the suite assigned to Earth's delegation, Yara had spent the previous evening preparing, not reviewing arguments, not rehearsing language, just sitting quietly with a cup of tea, going through the documents one final time, letting the weight of the moment settle somewhere she could carry it without it showing. Tomas had found her there around midnight. "You should sleep," he said. "I will." He hesitated in the doorway. "Do you know what you're going to say?" She turned the data pad over in her hands. "I know what I need to show them," she said. "The words will take care of themselves." He nodded and left. She sat for a while longer. 6 years of sitting in the outer ring. 6 years of being looked past, spoken over, and politely not quite dismissed. 6 years of watching the galaxy treat Earth as a minor footnote in a much older story. She had never once been offended by it. Offense was a waste of energy she had needed for other things. She set down the data pad and went to sleep. The long walk from the provisional ring to the central podium took nearly a minute. Every delegate in the chamber watched as the human ambassador walked steadily across the floor. There were no dramatic gestures, no visible emotion. Just a gray-haired woman in a dark diplomatic uniform, carrying a small data pad, walking the same distance she had watched every senior delegate walk for 6 years from the outside. Yara placed the data pad on the podium. "I have 3 items to present," she said. The first item concerned the legal timeline of the Dominion's Article 12 motion. A sequence of documents appeared above the podium. Sensor scans of the Sol system. Internal Dominion communications referencing those scans. And the official filing date of the Article 12 review request. The timeline was clear. The Dominion had conducted its reconnaissance survey 4 months before submitting the motion to the Concord. During those 4 months, shipyards within Vorath territory had been assembling the fleet that later appeared in the Sol system. The conclusion required no commentary. The Article 12 motion had not been a request for legal clarification. It had been diplomatic cover for a military operation already in progress. The hall grew quieter. The second item was more damaging. A set of encrypted communications, recovered by Earth's intelligence services, appeared on the display. Private messages exchanged between the Vorath ambassador and 3 senior delegations within the Concord. The messages did not contain explicit orders. They did not openly instruct the Dominion to invade Earth. But the meaning was unmistakable. Several delegates had been aware of the Dominion's intentions. Some had reassured the Vorath that the Article 12 motion would likely pass without serious opposition. One message from a senior representative stated the matter plainly. Control of the corridor access is worth more than the human seat. The hall erupted. Delegates spoke loudly across multiple tiers as the names of the 3 implicated civilizations appeared on the display. The moderator struggled to restore order. Tefrail, the Vorath legal representative, had stopped pretending to take notes. The KE delegate who had looked amused 3 weeks earlier. The one who had spoken past Yara in a trade session, who had watched Drex New York's Article 12 presentation with the faint smile of someone watching a competently executed play, sat completely still. His name was the second one on the screen. Eventually, the noise subsided. But the damage had been done. Yara waited until the chamber was fully quiet. "The third item," she said, "is a clarification." She looked across the tiers surrounding the hall, the inner rings, the middle rings, the directorate seats at the center. Earth did not misrepresent its military capabilities when it joined the Concord. Our government simply chose not to advertise them. Under Concord law, member civilizations were required to disclose defensive assets only when formally requested by the Security Directorate. No such request had ever been made regarding Earth, because no one had considered the question worth asking. Yara paused. When humanity entered the Concord, we made a deliberate decision. We believed it was wise to observe the behavior of our neighbors before revealing the full extent of our capabilities. Her gaze moved briefly across the inner rings. Now we have observed. The statement hung in the air. For several seconds, no one in the chamber spoke. Then Yara closed her datapad. She inclined her head slightly toward the moderator and walked back to her seat. The political consequences unfolded over the following months. An independent investigation confirmed the authenticity of every communication Yara had presented. 2 of the implicated delegations were formally censured and temporarily suspended from certain Security Council privileges. The 3rd disputed the findings, but ultimately lost support across a series of votes. The Vorith Dominion faced more serious penalties. Under Article 31 of the Concord Charter, the Dominion was officially censured for conducting an unauthorized military incursion against a member civilization. Their fleets were ordered to withdraw from all systems adjacent to Sol-connected trade routes. Economic sanctions limited Dominion access to several major commercial corridors for 5 years. Within the Dominion itself, the consequences were equally severe. High Marshal Katara was removed from command. Losing 140 warships in a single engagement was not the kind of outcome even a powerful empire could absorb without consequence. And Earth's status within the Concord changed permanently. The KE delegation formally proposed that humanity's provisional membership be terminated, not as a punishment, but because the designation had clearly outlived its purpose. The motion elevated Earth to full sovereign standing. The vote passed with overwhelming support. When the final document was presented for signature, Yara stepped forward. She signed the Elevation Charter in the same steady handwriting she had used throughout her diplomatic career. With that signature, humanity gained a permanent seat within the Security Directorate. For the first time since joining the Concord, Earth was no longer sitting in the outer ring. Several weeks after the Concord vote, the 14 Dreadnoughts of the United Earth Fleet remained in high orbit above Earth. They were no longer hidden. Across the galaxy, observatories and intelligence agencies studied every available image of the massive ships. Analysts attempted to measure their armor thickness, estimate their reactor capacity, calculate how long it might take other civilizations to build vessels of comparable scale. Most of the estimates arrived at the same conclusion: decades, possibly longer. Inside the UEF Indomitable, Admiral Haruto Shin stood on the observation deck looking down at the planet below. Earth turned slowly beneath the ship, blue oceans and white clouds drifting across the surface of a world that still looked small from orbit, despite everything it had accomplished. Footsteps sounded behind him. Petty Officer Lena Cho stopped a respectful distance away. She had asked her station chief for permission to speak with the admiral, which she had been told was unusual, but the chief had let her go anyway. She had been trying to understand something since the battle ended. "Sir," she said. Shin glanced back. "Yes." She looked out at the other dreadnoughts stationed nearby. "I wanted to ask something." "Go ahead. Now that everyone knows what we have." She paused. "What happens next?" Shin considered the question. He had already thought about it many times. The galaxy would change. Some civilizations would seek alliances, genuine ones, built on something other than assumption. Others would begin their own secret military programs. Trade relationships would shift. Political negotiations would become more careful. Power always reshaped the behavior of those around it. The simplest answer, though, was also the most accurate. He looked back toward Earth. "For a long time," he said quietly, "the galaxy believed humanity was weak." He paused. "Now they know that isn't true." Cho waited. Shin allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. "Which means," he said, "that from now on, they'll remember to knock before they come inside."